Aaron Canales.
Here.
Mr. Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Greenfield.
Here.
Mr. Hammond.
Here.
Mr. Reve.
Here.
Mr. Schmidt is absent. Ms. Zamara.
Here.
All right. Notice of this meeting was provided to the Bernardsville News, Courier News, excuse me, and the Star Ledger, filed with the municipal clerk, and posted on the municipal bulletin board on May 15th, 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So welcome. Tonight's meeting is a special meeting that we've called just for input from the public on the different referendum options that have come forward in our discussions. So just to give you, for some of you that haven't been here before, some of the background on the Open Space Trust Fund that we were talking about. November 1998, there was a referendum question where we asked the voters to approve the creation of an open space fund. And it was approved, and it's 2 cents on every $100 of assessed value. So we have been collecting that. You've been paying it in your taxes since 1998. Then in 2008, there was another referendum that the voters again approved. It was an amendment to the first one that said 20% of that tax money that we collect each year would be used for improvements to existing properties, and 80% would go into the acquisition fund.
Is it 25% could be used for either, or is it has to be?
No, it has to. There's no
Has to be?
option. I think it's because we set it aside each year and then we can accumulate it, right? The 20%, it doesn't go back into acquisition.
Well, my question is though, is it flexible or it's
No.
mandatory that be used for improvements?
The 80-20 is not flexible.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's just
Sorry, I was
20.
just- I didn't understand that,
No,
actually.
that was a good question. The projects that 20% has been used for have been things such as drainage at Kiwanis, some work at Claremont Field, the basketball courts, I think, on Seney Drive, some improvements to the pool. What else have we done? The Claremont steps,
Playground.
playground. So it's been used for different projects around town. We have a list of the properties that the borough owns that are on what they call the Rossi list, which is the Recreation and Open Space Inventory, so ROSI. So those are the properties that we own that are technically considered open space. And they include, there's a lot on Chestnut Avenue that right now is just an open lot. There's Claremont Field, Kiwanis Rotary, and the playground. The Laurelwood Trail that goes through what we call Burrow Springs. Has anybody been on the Laurelwood Trail?
Yeah.
Okay. It goes up from, like, across, right next to where the medical building is, and goes up to Laurelwood. Okay. Lindabury Nervine Park, which is this park out here. There's a property on Meeker Road. Then there's Moraine Crest Park, which is on Mount Airy. There's the Old Army Trail, which we just opened off of Chestnut and Hardscrabble. There's Peters Tract, which now we just added another property to 251 Claremont, which allows us access into Peters Tract. The Polo Grounds, which includes Veterans Field, the Evan Cow Field, the swimming pool, the basketball courts, and the Rose Bowl. So those are all the properties that the borough owns that are on what we call the Rossi report. And so how this all came about that we ended up here tonight, when they installed Veterans Field, it was the first phase of what was thought to be a 2-phase project. I think some of the parents, I see some of you here, came to the council and wanted to know when phase 2 was going to get done and when some of the issues with that field were going to be addressed, because there were questions about if it was the right size, if there was going to be padding. So that was before my time, was when Mayor Suey was here, and he had suggested that an informal group be formed, a committee, to talk to all the different people that were involved, get some answers, and I think that group met once or twice on their own. When I became mayor, I formalized that group and made it an ad hoc committee. And an ad hoc committee means it's short-term for a certain purpose. So what we asked this committee to do was not just look at, hi guys. How are you? Not just look at the Polo Grounds and Veterans Field, but to look at all the properties that are on our Rossi list, what kinds of improvements they might need. And just, talking to some of the people that use the field and come up with a list. And then come up with a way to try and fund those, because there was not money technically set aside for phase 2 or for Peters Track development or some of the other things that people wanted to do. So, and I don't know if you read the report, but that committee then brought forward an interim report and proposed that there be an amendment to the open space tax so that almost flip-flopping it, 20% would be acquisition, only would always be acquisition. The other 80% would be either or, so either acquisition or development, depending on what the needs were that year or any future years. So then we got into a discussion, some people from the audience, we got feedback from the environmental committee, from recreation, from open space committee, with different ideas, different opinions. So we felt we needed more input from the public, because what our goal is here tonight is to find a plan, and I know everybody's got their own ideas and what their favorites are, but what we're trying to do is find the best way to do this that has a chance of getting passed in November, because this will be a ballot question, or not. I mean, we don't even have to do this, but we're hoping it'll be a ballot question in November that most of the community would support. So that's why we want to get feedback from as many people as we can. There's also, this is being live streamed, and there will be a survey online, so people can, if they couldn't get here tonight, can watch the meeting and then fill out the survey and let us know which option. So we ended up with kind of 6 options. The first option that we had, that someone suggested, was to just have 100% of this tax, either or. So the whole thing we collect, which is about $480,000 a year, could be either acquisition or improvements, depending on what the needs were. So that was one of the, which is, I think, what the Land Conservancy said is what most towns do. But when we set up our open space, that was not what the town wanted to do. Then there was the one that the ad hoc committee proposed, which was 20% acquisition, 80% either acquisition or improvement. Tom, you want to explain yours?
So the discussion a couple meetings back when we first brought this up was that there's the idea or an option that we could take some of the existing funds that are locked up on the acquisition only side and do a one-time transfer. So keeping the money in the open space fund, but increasing the proportion that's currently in the fund, increasing the proportion that would be for either or. That would give us more money in the short term and roughly a similar amount of money over the longer term to the other ideas. And it would give us more flexibility then to consider projects at the beginning without having to borrow money to do some of those projects. So it wouldn't be taking any money out of the open space account. It would be just allocating a larger portion of the existing funds as flexible, and then by ordinance in the future, we would have to consider if any or all of that amount that was transferred over. The example, that one example was given was $2 million, would leave a substantial amount of money, more than $5 million would still remain in the fund, or approximately $5 million. And
I forgot to say, the current balance is 6.058998 right now, after we bought the 251.
And it's projected to be higher than that at the end of the year because of the refunds that we're getting from Green Acres or the contribution from them, as well as the amount that we're collecting this year. So it's supposed to be, per the borough staff, about 6.8 by the end of the year. So
Okay.
what that would allow us to do,
Well, we're not showing it, just explaining it.
I am explaining it.
Okay.
That number's for this past year, not the end of this year. So
528.
So the concept here is to not change the total amount of money that's in the open space fund by referendum. The amount would still stay in the open space fund, but a greater proportion of it would be available, that if an ordinance then came in front of the council debated that ordinance, found that there was a worthwhile project to fund, then that money could then, after that next ordinance is considered, if it were approved, then would be allocated to those specific projects.
And then that's our option 3, so it would be that one-time transfer of money from what would have been just what was in acquisition for available for spending, and then but it would stay in future years the existing 20% acquisition, 80%.
Sorry, 80% acquisition.
I mean, 20%
20%. So it
improvements.
wouldn't change the underlying way that new taxes are collected into the fund. The fund would still then be accruing sort of on the same trajectory that we're on before, but the difference would be the transfer of that one-time amount.
The 4th option was the same concept, but transferring $1 million into available money for spending, using the 20% acquisition and the 80% either or, but having a sunset date so that after 4 or 5 years, it would flip back to the way it is now, which is 20% acquisition, 80%.
I just want to correct it. It was 1 million, but that the 80-20 would be flipped as in proposal 2 for
Right,
that
right.
for a
that's-
finite
yeah,
period of
I
time.
thought that's what I said, and then it would go back after sunsetting. The 5th was not to have a referendum question at all to amend the ordinance, but instead use bonding for improvements. And that would be a new tax instead of the old, the existing tax, that if you bond, it becomes debt. And then the 5th or 6th option is any of the above, but having a sunset on it. So if you did do 100% either or, it might only be for 5 years. And then it would go back to the way it is now.
And can I just clarify one thing about sunset, because there was a question that came up from a member of the public. The sunset, if passed by referendum, and the referendum mentions a sunset, the council would have no discretion. The sunset would then come up. It would be set at 7 years or 5 years or 10 years. And when that time passes, it automatically would revert to the old way unless a new referendum came up.
Right.
So the sunset is automatic, and the council or future councils would not have discretion to not do the sunset. That would be part
Right,
of
it
the
would
that would be part of
have
the
to go
referendum.
back to a referendum again. Okay, so we're gonna do something a little different for our public portion.
Can I just ask one?
Yes.
If I could have a couple of minutes to talk about option 1 before we start. Mainly because I did quite a bit of research on other towns that have open space funds, and just wanted to share that with people to kind of get a perspective on how other towns handle their open space fund.
Do you know how many it is?
Yes, so I looked at about 25 towns, and the list of towns that I think many of the sports families can relate to visiting for our leagues. Oradell, Midland Park, Ridgewood, Maplewood, Edison, Wyckoff, Park Ridge, Fanwood, East Hanover, Mendham, Chester, Hoboken, Point Pleasant, Wayne, Bedminster, Franklin, and Moorestown are all 100%, which is option 1, 100% acquisition and development. Some of them even include maintenance. So,
Actually, Chester is too, both Chesters,
Chester,
I think.
yeah, I didn't do Chester, but, oh yeah, Chester's on my list, and Mendham. So of the towns that were acquisition only, there were very few, less than 5. And I can tell you that a lot of them have, all of them have different scenarios when it comes to how many parks they have available to them. It's always a different case, but I also reached out to the DEP. So the DEP, who's in charge of Green Acres, and they said most towns are acquisition and development, if not more than half. And if they originated like we did with only acquisition, then most of them by now have switched over to a development side as well. So I just wanted to kind of give that, because a lot of these meetings have come up where, you know, we see other fields and we want to know how, you know, how they handle it. So I thought that might be helpful
Okay,
to know.
thank you.
Sorry.
What I'd like to do, because I think, you know, we've had meetings where everybody's come up and said their views, so I wanted to try something different. What I'd like you to do is count off by 6.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5, 1, 2,
4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, we don't know, you can go with that. We don't want Jake.
1.
6,
1,
2, 3,
4.
5,
6.
1, 3.
Okay, what I'd like us to do is, ones are in the Marines, no. Ones are, what we're gonna do is try and break into focus groups. So that what I want is for us to all think outside of what our presumed ideas are. So you may have come here, you know, thinking that this is the end, you know, this is the one I want, but I want you to think about some of the other ones. So each group, so group 1 will look at the option 1. And what I'd like you to do is get in a group, write down pros and cons to that particular option, and settle on 3 main pros and cons. And then we're gonna come back and put them on the board, because I want everybody to really look at everybody else's plan. So we're not just coming up and I like this one, I like that one, I like this one. I really want to get you thinking about what some of the options that maybe you hadn't even really delved into. Okay? So, yes.
Do you have written copies of the options?
Um,
For those of us that
We
were
should, huh?
not scratching them?
Probably.
This is the older one. Can we
I just
get,
made a bunch of copies.
this was the way.
Just make
Do we want you have the new wording written down?
Yeah. This is the
So are we comfortable with the new wording, Mayor?
Are we calling it?
Transfer,
Transfer of 2 million, are you okay with that? Fine, okay, let's do that.
I'll make this good, like 15.
Everybody, nobody has a problem with that wording?
Okay.
Okay. So we'll make copies of that. In the meantime, what I'd like is if you're in group 1, you can go into the conference room over there on that side. Group 2, let's kind of go over in this corner. Stop it, nothing. Another one? The green shirt. Hang on just a second, can you hold on just a second? Remember what our goal here, what happened? Is to look at the plan as how the general public, the voting public might look at it, okay? How much time do we have? Let's say 20 minutes? Too long, 15, because I want you to write down, so somebody can describe, and we'll write down what's positive, what's negative, and settle on 3. So 2, where does 3's go? 2's over here, let's do 3's on this side, 4's in the back, 5's out in the hallway, and then 6 down at the bottom of the stairs.
Friendly to each other.
6 from the bottom of the stairs.
I think we'll probably still
You know,
And it's like, probably, yeah. Makes sense.
Oh, no thanks.
I'd like to, but no.
Too early for me. Much more productive than one at a time, coming up, standing at the microphone.
But they're still gonna have the opportunity to do that or no?
They could. We'll see how this goes.
I think it's good because you have people with different opinions.
Yes, that was my goal.
But it's possible that, you know, if one strong personality.
Overpower the others.
You don't know. You don't know because you randomly pick them, so that's probably as good as the system is anyway.
Well, and people with the same opinion tend to sit together. So this would
Well, no, that was what I'm saying. Like, it's a good way to do it. Just
There's an article on LA.com, probably from the same register, that came out right after the elections last year.
yeah,
And it's all referendums and how people voted.
yeah.
So the state one was schools,
Yeah.
those two towns. Each one had open spaces.
Did any pass? So, but an equal number or more failed. What were the five towns? What were the five towns that you found that had acquisition?
Acquisition only.
Didn't you say when in your
What was
comments
it, a
that there were
percentage or
five?
active?
So there were Hillsborough acquisition, which was weird.
Yeah.
But the one thing, you know, we talk about Sunset.
Yeah.
A lot of them have black. Police get to so if you think about it, we would have done that.
That's a good point. So, are you saying the 100% ones have 5-year sunsets as well?
Oh, a lot of them did. So then Chatham, which she said. Oh, that's right. So Chatham was introduced acquisition only, and then they chose to revisit it every 5 years. And within those,
It changed
they
within very
have
Yeah. Yeah.
Randolph, which has lost.
You mean if we're on or off?
No, we are. I think we're on, but also the sound. I don't know if it's going to pick up fairly.
I mean, I don't disagree with that.
That's why I want to get
It needs to be simple.
Less likely. Yes, but I'm afraid that get certain segments of the that's the only thing.
Let's see what people say. But I think these kinds of yeah. we should wait and hear what people say. I mean, I have ideas and thoughts, but I think rather than try and influence it, because I'm thinking somebody might.
Yeah, that's true. No,
Yeah, I'll do that.
sitting here.
He's looking at it on there.
They do the other workout, it's gold.
Maybe they put vodka. Jeff, how was your trip?
It was really good.
Did you just get back at like 3 o'clock?
I got back around 6 a.m. I took the red. I left early last night. I took the red eye at 11:30.
Okay.
And then I didn't sleep on the plane. I got here, went straight to where I've been up since 6 a.m. yesterday.
Oh my
I'm just sort of relying on my trauma training and powering through.
You look like you're faded. You do look tired today.
It's an illusion. I just do that to sucker my enemies in.
Is that it?
But it was a good. It was my son was. It was a nice ceremony. He got admitted to the bar.
Where were you?
Colorado. I went to court and watched him in action. You know, it was clerking.
Oh, really?
It was fun.
Where is he clerking? DC?
No, he's in Denver. He's looking for the Denver district. Well, that was what legislature's going to have to come back. The only reason why the court's got involved is because the legislature and now they have to go back and because everybody's
Should we give people a 5-minute warning? Are we? Is it 10 minutes already? It's only 5 minutes.
so this is work.
I guess it's
We have to talk about non-verbal.
You're right.
What are you doing this summer? Are you? Jeff and his friends were trying to strategize around when would be the best time to go, when at least enough people are there, but I don't think that's going to happen for about 24 months.
She's a bartender.
Oh, really? So it's like the cantina from the original Star Wars?
Do they have characters dressed up as all the aliens everywhere?
So when school's over, they don't play
I don't think I would enjoy like a show with all the people. No, it's like now or never kind of thing. It's nice. How old was the kitchen? We have granite in our kitchen. It looks right around the sink. There's some crack. The granite has been propagating, getting bigger and bigger every year. So now I feel like, one day it's like bam, and I'm gonna be stuck with it. And the thing is, like, to get, like, I like granite. So to replace it feels like fun. It's like, how thousands of dollars to fix a crack? One crack. No, that's what I'm saying. You have to replace the whole thing because you can't match it. So the entire countertop can have to go. If this, I mean, right now it just looks bad. But if it fails, I'm stuck. I'm like, I don't want it to.
It's not like it's on an island.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I actually replaced the island already. So that's kind of pushed me in the spot. Because they didn't send the island I could replace just the outside. Just hope it's hanging there. You know where the counter goes. The question is, well, do you really rip that out and leave the cabinet? And if you're going to replace the cabinet, shouldn't we get new appliances? And I don't do the floors at the same time. It's going to be a mess.
You gotta paint. Go back.
It's exactly what I'm thinking.
So I would just see what that we have to It's nice now. I do a happy kitchen dance every day.
How long ago were you finished? Oh, so this is pretty brand new.
Yeah.
Because they probably figure you're an influencer. Oh, it is. Not it. I mean, they do it for all.
Oh, yeah. Here I was like, oh, it's going to be easy. I'll just go down and tell them to come on over.
And then me, I changed one little thing. Because I'm like, well, I can't just ask me to let it go. Oh, just do me a favor. Couldn't do that. And I didn't want special people, right? I ended up paying twice. It wasn't that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Mine only just required one. That was fun. Did you change the floor?
One corner of the kitchen. We solved
Spent 12 I know there's at least 2 different ones. Yeah, well, that's even better.
She did that.
Even even better, right? Although they got cookies. You turned 15 last year. Graduating 8th grade and we it seems very like when he went from elementary to middle school, like, oh, this would be a big deal. He's like, yeah, it's like I've been there. Right? So that was I was really happy about it. Right? So then, you know, high school things, I'm not gonna make an issue out of it. He's not
I think that they look bad and they did some work and they
No, they looked horrible, and they did, but then the ones
I guess I don't remember.
They were unsafe. So because I remember when you did that, I said one day,
Not that many people down anyway.
You
know, these numbers are very close too.
I know.
Because I looked at some of them and that's
Just so we know, that's the only reason I
the biggest hit is from this
All right, then one is this
I think these are questions you have to ask yourself.
I mean, I think some of these other as it is, which is not
I think, the opposite, as the numbers get big, we have to be judicious. When you get back here,
I have to say, people do seem to be talking to each
first thing we need to do is clarify everything. For everything.
Okay, real quick, get ready to go. No shit.
I'm assuming that there's no plan for it. There is there's Lindbergh Road, and that's one that's where it's on the road line. And it's there by the pond, and down from the road.
Why is this one zero? There's a property that's on this side of the railroad tracks that we own. It's in the inventory. Right now, it's there. Kind of like Marine Crest. I don't even know if it's access to it.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
They're coming.
So do you know what the red versus the black means on this?
That is Doug's Okay, we're back? Yes, we done? Yes, back? Get my gavel, where's my gavel? Do this? Okay, we're back? Everybody's back. Just before we collect everybody's data, were there any questions that came up with information you didn't have that maybe needed cleared up? Because one of the things somebody asked over here, and I just thought I'd explain this, there is a resolution that we have, just, because somebody asked about the process. If a project comes up that we think we want to spend money on, how do we make that decision? And it actually, there's a resolution from 2010 that says, before a contract is executed for the purchase of any property or the development of any eligible property, and before an ordinance is introduced to appropriate any money from the fund, it has to be submitted to the following boards, commissions, and committees for their review and input. And that would be the Open Space Advisory Committee, the Recreation Committee, Shade Tree Committee, Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, Environmental Commission, and all boards, commissions, and committees shall submit their comments by the date set forth in the memorandum forwarding the proposal to them. So it's not that, the council is just gonna one day say, hey, let's go spend that money. There is a real process that we have to go through, and then when we had input from all of them, there would be an ordinance that would have a public hearing. So it would be at least 2 meetings, you'd introduce it, 1 meeting, you'd have a public hearing. So it's not, that the council will go crazy spending money. So, yeah.
Mayor, does that apply whether it's a referendum or a bond, or is that only in the referendum?
That's if it's coming out of open space funds.
So
If it's a bond, you still have to do an ordinance.
Well, the bond ordinance usually designates the projects right in section 3 of the ordinance, so it will say repaving, mine or whatever. So you don't need it for that, but any other capital improvement fund, things like that, capital surplus, they all require an ordinance before you can appropriate the money.
And that's always a two-step process, so. Okay, group 1. Option 1 is the 100%. Who was that? Who was the secretary for group 1?
Oh, we did the secretary?
Well, we. So this is. Oh, that looks awful skinny. Do we have this one of those fatter?
Same as the other.
This one.
Did anyone write anything down for group 1?
Okay, let's start with here. We've got option 1.
Alright.
Which is 100%, either or. I'll just simplify it.
Anybody that was in group 1, feel free to amend my very complete comments.
So
We had one pro, maximum flexibility.
Do you need them to say names or addresses?
And we had 3 cons, or 4, everybody speak up if I forget.
I only want 3.
Total, no, it's not total council discretion, we have 3. No sunset, clause. Competition for resources. And there was a 4th one.
Third.
I know, there was a 3rd one, because I crossed one off. So, if nobody else remembers what the other one was, there was another con, we were walking out the door. That's what we have.
Slow.
Oh, we talked about the council being.
Oh, just the council being in charge of making the decision.
But
That made me very
Mary
nervous.
Jane just read the resolution about the process, so that's all, that's that.
If we wanted further approval, then council.
I think one way to characterize is option 1
doesn't find common ground across the community.
Does what?
Does not find common ground across the interests of the community.
Okay.
You were in that group, right?
I was. And I live at 115 Washington Court. My name is Greg, no. I got a phone number too. But my cell phone doesn't work. So
I'm not, I was just kind of,
no.
give it a flavor.
Say that.
Okay, so option 2 is the ad hoc, that's the 80%, 20% acquisition, and 80% was either or. So, who was that group? Number 2, Paul.
So Jenna was our secretary on the spokesmodel.
Okay.
So pros, I'll be honest, we had a hard time on the pros on this one. But we did come up with 3. We said it's a pro and a con at the same time. Council accountable. It's also a con.
I get the feeling we're not trusted.
It's actually been literally said, Mary Jane.
Okay.
A couple of
Right.
times.
And then but on the pro side, there was immediate
Wait,
flexibility.
that was a pro that the council.
It's a pro and a con.
And a con.
Okay.
And a con.
The pro was that you could have public hearings and people can come and say what they want, but the con was that the council had ultimate decision and the lack of trust that was mentioned. But now that's not an issue.
Okay. Interesting.
So we did say it does give us flexibility, which was noted in the first group on the pro. And then on a pro, it does bring tactical value to the town, but it draws long-term risk. So you can do something quicker, do stuff quicker,
Okay.
but at the risk of strategic acquisitions. So
Okay.
there's a pro of you can do stuff faster,
Okay. So,
but there's an asterisk on that one, like Barry Bonds' home runs. The risk is, and the risk on this one here,
right, you get to do it faster.
but you drain funds.
During acquisition funds.
Correct. Alright, acquisition funds at risk. And the color on that is that we do need to build a war chest for much needed usable parkland for acquisition. That's the risk.
Okay, so that's the acquisition, and then what's the risk?
Risking, risking long-term needs. Again, we're 30 acres short of usable parkland in this town, based on open space report. We should have like 65 acres, we only have 30 or 35. So we're woefully short. And then the con was.
Does that number include Peter's Track, which is now accessible?
Yes.
Yes, it's a
Yes, that includes that.
That was always on the list.
That was always on the list, and we're short.
We just couldn't get to it.
For our and that's based on our population of just short.
Yeah, no, I just wanna make sure that was counted.
And then the other con was, it's a blank check with no priorities of where's the money go. Con. Team, did I miss anything? Yes, sir. Okay, good job. Thank you.
Okay, who was 3? Over here, so option 3 was the 2 million. Right? 2 million, which would get transferred and be available for spending.
So our group talked about a couple pros and cons, settled on 2 per side. For pro, it would give immediate funds to deal with high priority items. I think we all agree that there's dealing with even our existing open space and making them usable in certain ways with paths and adjustments and fields, etc., would exceed that money. So allowing us to do some immediate development improvements that we feel are needed. Cons, that there's not a plan. I think this was mentioned with the last one. The plan meaning cost, priority, timing. The pros is that it sort of has a built-in sunset. This is option 3. By built-in sunset, it leaves the current 80-20 in place. So if there's a withdrawal of $2 million, then it gets replenished automatically over about 6 years, I think is the way it works out. And that had sort of a small you know, the right, the benefit of hopefully being politically more palatable, because we're actually not changing the 80-20, it's staying in place. But on the con, that the withdrawal itself is a tough sell politically. I mean, there was support for it in our group, there was lack of support for it in our group, there were reasonable people who could disagree about it, but it is a withdrawal from an existing account that was set up, and it's going to be something that would have to be convince the voters. It's not easy.
Okay. Who was for?
Cliff Sebastian, Keystone Fence Road. So we had, for pros, we had some immediate funds, similar to number 3. That we can use for improvements now.
I can't write that down. So it was immediate funds. This is the one with, this is the 1 million.
No. This is the 1 million.
So this is 1 million switching.
20%
20
for acquisition.
20 acquisition and 80 for either or.
For a certain period of time.
Right, with the sunset. Okay. So pros, we got immediate fund.
Then since it had a sunset built in, you could almost use this as a pilot program to see how it would work for switching the 80-20. And then we had a tough time with the pros, but we said the fact that we're even having this discussion means that this is something different and maybe just better than what we have now. So there was another pro.
Okay.
And then we had for cons, number 1, in a particular order, is that this wording is very confusing. We had a very hard time understanding exactly what we were dealing with. So I think it would be very confusing to the voters. The other issue was that there isn't an actual plan for the money that will be withdrawn, the $1 million. So big questions about that. And then the sunset itself, it could be a pro, but it also could be a con, because we're wondering why are we forced then to, if we have an issue, we're making a vote now. If we have a problem down the road, just like we're having a problem now, we could re-vote that. Why would we leave the sunset at this point? The voters can decide down the road if they don't like this plan.
Okay.
Can I ask questions or not?
For clarification?
Yeah. So would it not be a con if you knew specifically what the $1 million was for?
I believe.
Yeah, and I think we've heard that with another option.
Yeah, we've heard it a couple
too.
times. So
Having a plan laid out already.
if you're taking a lump sum out, they want a plan. Yeah, so.
That runs across the board.
Yeah, but I think one of the issues that I think we've talked about is if you have a plan, if it's that specific, what you might happen is people will say, well, I want this done, and this is on the list, so I'm not voting for it because I don't want that, but I want this. You know, it might almost be too specific instead of being, you know, as the needs come up or which, I don't know. So it's, you know, it's one is.
Everybody has to have something planned.
Yes. Yeah, so, yeah, that's it, we would have to come up with a balance, and we're kind of on a time deadline, because we have to have the question done by.
And you want to do a good job and do it right.
Yeah, let's do it right.
Okay, so that was option 4.
So I would accept what Mom just said.
Yeah.
We should do this correctly. Do it right. Let's just do it right. Let's move
That's
forward.
option 5. Okay, option 5 is to bond for projects, I guess, as they come on. So we had 5. Oh, very nice.
No, just jump in if I missed it. You're with that?
You're good.
Okay, so we're doing pros first?
Yeah.
Okay, so quick, effective, right? We can do it very quickly. That includes, let's say, spending the money today. realizing the benefit today.
Right, okay.
Sort of synonym, sort of the same thing. Extremely cost-effective capital. Right, I don't know how to summarize this, but I think for all of us who pay taxes, we expect rates of return on our money much higher than what the municipality can borrow for. We have AAA rates, we have the 10-year treasury at 2%. This is probably the cheapest we can borrow money.
Yep.
Great
They're here.
rates.
Yep.
Yeah, interest
So,
rates are very low.
I'll just say, just call it cheap capital.
Actually, very cheap capital.
Very cheap.
Very cheap.
Historically
Yeah.
cheap.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Yes. It's very extremely cheap.
Okay.
We still have the option, it's kind of an esoteric example, but so if this goes to our con, I'll jump into this in a second, but the con was, there's certainly the case where we don't improve value, there's a little more debt on the municipality's balance sheet, and then at some point in the future, we have to pay that back so taxes go up.
Right.
The rebuttal that we have to that is that, some people are gonna hate me for this, there's an open space fund there. If the money's spent through bonding, we can see and touch it, right? And we have an invoice and it's paid for, and we have debt. We could put out a very clear referendum 2-3 years in the future and say, hey, we know there's $7 or $7.5 million in this fund. We want to pay, instead of making your taxes higher, we've spent that money, we have the debt. We can take $2 million and we'll put it to a referendum and pay the money down. So you still have that option. I don't know if that's.
Jack, is that something, can you use the open
You
space to
can
pay
use
debt?
the open space trust funds to pay down debt, or either.
It's on,
Can you-
it's in the current rule.
Yeah, but is it the whole amount or is it the 80/20?
No, the whole 100%.
The whole 100% can be used to pay down debt.
Yes.
Can I cut-
No, 20%.
Only
20%.
20% for development, 80% for.
Right, but if
I
we
thought
incurred,
the debt service was in the 20%.
if we incurred the example was $7 million. If we incurred $7 million worth of debt, right, and it was for development projects, could we take the acquisition portion of the accumulated funds and pay down debt that's related to development? Is that legal?
If you only use it to pay down development,
You could?
you could, you still have to earmark it for whatever product came out of it, whether it's, purchase price or debt.
I thought the 20% was limited, debt service.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
20%. So 80% for acquisition and 20% for development, and debt service.
No,
So, yeah.
no, either the town can pay down debt,
For
that's-
improvements
and-
with
Or
100%.
either improvements or acquisition.
Is that without a referendum? Like what if,
Yeah.
regardless of the language, if you
Yes.
put out a referendum
Yes.
2 years in
No,
the
it's already
future?
there.
That's the existing,
Yeah.
that's the existing.
That's the existing
Board.
tax, yeah. So you always have that option to then put out a referendum.
That's right.
Yeah, so you kind of have you get to look and see the results. It's clear, right, because people can actually see what the money went toward.
Uh-huh.
Unless you've already used that acquisition money in the interim, then it's not there.
Right, but if we're bonding it, then we're not dipping into the open space fund.
But by bonding it, you incur debt, which will increase taxes, and you're saying
Right.
at a future time, you could then come back into the open space fund to pay down that debt, but if we've acquired land with the open space fund, then you don't have that
We
safety
would
valve.
obviously have to be aware of that.
Yeah. Can I just go back to the question about the bonding? The last sentence of the question in 2007, 2008 was, or payment of debt service on indebtedness issued or incurred by the borough for any of those purposes. So now you cover.
I thought that was that's what the 20% is. 20%, 80% was acquisition and 20% was for development and the debt service.
No.
But we thought the 20% could be used to pay the interest.
That's the
on
debt
bond.
service.
Yeah.
But what Jack's saying is that the whole thing can be used as.
You mean
And
you mean the pot though?
it has to come out of the right pot.
Yeah.
So you can't use acquisition money to pay down development debt service.
Yeah, that was my question.
That's what
Can we use acquisition funds to pay down debt related to development?
No.
No, so the only thing.
So, okay, just because there was a little bit of crosstalk, I think what we're saying is that
if we have money in the acquisition side and we've incurred $7 million for development, we cannot take, even by referendum, the acquisition money and pay down debt related to development.
That's correct.
We cannot do that. We cannot do that.
That's correct.
We can for acquisition. Okay, well, that's.
Well, but you can use that money for acquisition, so you wouldn't,
Right,
you
but
wouldn't
some-
have debt.
You could use that.
Right, you could, unless you wanted something that you needed more, and then you might and pay down
For acquisition.
for acquisition.
Yeah.
And pay down using acquisition money instead, because it increases your purchase.
And I know what a lot of people bring up is Rushland Farms, that at some point we need to have money for that. I think, I mean, if that ever comes on the market, it's probably the county, I don't think we could ever have enough money
Not
in
on
our
our
county.
own, right, but we need to show.
But if the county wanted to buy it, they would expect us to chip in probably 3 million or something, so we need to, we don't wanna.
We want to have a
Be
say
ready,
in
yes.
terms of how it's used.
Right, so
Otherwise,
that
we
would
have
give
no
us
say.
partial ownership, and so we
Right,
would,
that's a
we would need to contribute a couple of million at least, so. But we'd never have enough money to buy them. Yeah, I know that comes up a lot, that property. Okay, so did we get another con?
Yeah, there's probably one or two more, one doesn't concern me, you guys are the ones up there, voter pushback, right? You're gonna get that
Yeah.
whenever you raise debt, without asking. And then, I guess, kind of consistent with that, would just be fiscal conservative.
What was the last one?
Fiscal conservative. Like spending money before you, don't have it, or before you have it.
Yeah.
I guess they tie together.
Yeah, we have one more pro.
Yes.
We don't need for referendum.
Right.
Because a referendum is risky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Suzanne, option 5 is the referendum.
That was And 6, the group that was bigger than bottom here, was that, so this was, the idea of whether or not, to have a sunset on any of those.
So our group is the Sunset Group, and the Sunset only really applies to options 1, 2, and 4, because there is no change to there's a lump sum coming out of option 3. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This has a sunset.
Yes, that
That
has a sunset in it.
Yes.
And but option 3 doesn't, it's just a one-time transfer.
So it's
there's no need
effectively-
for sunset, and there's no need for sunset on option 5, the bonding. So we're talking about 1, 2, and 4, because we've switched the percent.
4 has a sunset.
Or has a sunset.
It does, and so we're trying to get this, we're looking at what the pros and cons are.
3 has a built-in
To sunsetting options 1, 2, and 4. They're the only ones to which is sunset.
Even though 4 has one already, these are pros and cons
For sunsetting in general.
For sunsetting in
In
general.
any of them,
Right,
right.
exactly.
Okay.
So, the first pro for having a sunset is there's a defined period of change and therefore fiscal discipline. You know that you're only gonna have access to that, additional development money for a set period of time. The second pro is that it forces the council to prioritize, and in the course of doing that, it also encourages people in the general public to get involved in what's going on in town, because if they want to get, during that period of time, you better get down here and speak up for what you want, and that's good, because here we are all down here, and, you know, we're learning and we're getting involved in our town. Number 3, because it has a sunset, this is a pro, we felt like the voters might be more inclined to try it for a period of time. 4 years, I think we were talking about. But we did come up with some cons. The first con is that if we bought something towards the end of the period before the sunset, say in year 4, it could be detrimental
to anything that we do right before the sunset, because the money wouldn't be there to do the things that we immediately need to do with that new acquisition. So, things purchased in year 4 would be negatively impacted.
With a 4-year sunset.
With a 4-year sunset, which is what we were asked to look at. Any sunset, if it's 4 years, 7 years, 10 years, but the first sunset, the only time I ever heard anybody talking about a 10-year was when Tom was explaining about option 4. He opened up different avenues for that one, but we were asked to look at 4 years. The one con, because of the deadline, there would be winners and losers with the sunset. I want to get 4 in, is that okay, Mary Jane?
Sure.
Okay.
I only have 2 here for cons.
I know we're ready to give you 2 more, but I wanted to ask in advance. Possibility that you might be rushing to decision to get in within the time frame. And the last one was, what about unforeseen circumstances causing an overrun in project 2 and project 4 in year 4, nothing would be left for them. There could be a hurricane, that's a major impact, or a minor impact would be an overrun on cost and the money runs out. And so we didn't really have like one of the plans, but I guess we would just say unforeseen circumstances. Thank you. Do I need to give you my name and future? Is that what you're doing? Okay, good, thanks. I didn't know that.
There's also, I think people have been voting online, haven't they? Racking up.
That's a flag.
That doesn't sound like a pain.
There's 5 people.
We have our seats and votes. Red dots. I didn't see.
What are you looking for?
Red dots. Okay. Did anyone have any other questions, comments? I mean, I think everybody got a chance to talk, and my hope was that by doing this, we wouldn't be just, everybody coming up one at a time, kind of saying the same things and, not really thinking them through, but just hearing everybody's opinion. So if you had a question or maybe something that you just thought of that maybe wasn't here, Rosalie?
Do you have to come up?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments about bonding, which I personally just think is the most fiscally responsible choice. The first council meeting we came to, I was really surprised and taken off guard by the number of issues that needed to be addressed with our facilities. I mean, the state that they were in, and I'm not very much in contact with the sports program, and so I was really surprised and saddened by the fact of the apparently the state of disrepair that the fields and different parks and everything were in, and that they badly need money to be fixed. And so I was thinking about, how did this situation ever happen? I mean, how did all this disrepair happen? And so I was thinking, like, well, what have we done in the past? How have we, before we even had the open space fund, how were these issues addressed? How did we care for our parks, our fields, the pool, the municipal pool? I don't know how things were taken care of. I guess it was a line item budget in the budget each year. Funds were set aside maybe for these issues. What sources, do we have any sources for funding improvements today, or why are we attacking the open space fund for this? I just don't understand it as to the past, and why have all these issues kind of piled up, and suddenly we're facing a bad situation? Because it seems to me that we need in this community a permanent vehicle to address the maintenance, the repair, the care of all our public spaces, our fields, our parks, etc. I think that they should be in great shape, and we should be very proud of them. And that, I think bonding is the most fiscally responsible way to do that. The prices are fabulous right now, and it's also the fastest way to get things done. You don't have to have an ordinance. You can get, as you were saying, you can get things approved very quickly. And I just want to.
You need an ordinance to bond.
You don't have to have a referendum, I think she means.
One of the things I think I think we're talking about two different things, because maintenance is an operational cost that we have to look at every year, and that's part of our general operational budget. Improvements is a capital expense, so that's going to come. That has to. I mean, it's still we set aside a certain amount for capital improvements. But that includes everything. I mean, that's the library, that's this building, that's our roads, there's a lot that the police, that all goes into capital, police equipment, cars, trucks, whatever, fire trucks. So there's a big demand for capital improvements, which is why I think we looked at increasing the amount that's in the open space, the percentage, so that can't be used for maintenance. I think the council has been pretty strict about not using that for everyday maintenance, because it should be for things that make the fields and all our properties improved.
Yeah, but it's like fixing the roof up on that one field.
It's fixed. It's done. Yes, it is done. But there are, we're a small town. We have limited resources. We have limited, I love when people say, well, get your grounds crew out there. And we don't have that kind of, the resources that, say, Bernards Township has. So we struggle every year with the budget, and I think the Finance Committee agrees. There was a lot of, we had, in requests for capital compared to what we could get in the budget? What did we have, like almost 2 million?
I think it was close to 2 million.
2 million in requests, and we ended up with what, 400,000?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tight budget, and there's a cap on how much we can raise. Is it the tax levy or the? Yeah.
Yeah, 2%.
2%. So it's always a balancing act. I think if you look at, I think Carrie was saying this the other day, we have some really nice properties. We really do. I mean, the playground is nice. It takes us longer sometimes to get there. Kiwanis Field, thank you, Little League. A lot of these properties that we have, the pool was donated. That property was given to us. The money to build the first one was given. We don't have those kind of gifts anymore. We used to get a lot of very nice gifts. All the fire trucks in the past were donations. Now we have to buy them. Nobody's writing those checks to buy things anymore. And that's a problem we have to deal with now. So, we struggle with that. I don't know, if you see things, let us know. If there's something that we missed, I think, the roof was unfortunate. Sometimes Doug is our facilities person. He's also our assistant business administrator. He's not out there every day. A lot of you are. So if you see something that you think needs to be addressed, sometimes just calling it to our attention, we can get somebody specifically out there. So please, if there's a maintenance issue that you think we need to do, let us know. Did anybody else have questions or? Oh, a whole bunch. Yes, you had yours up first there. So.
Hi, good evening. Dave DePodwin, Old Colony Road. Good evening. Just starting to read the 2019 Environmental Resource Inventory completed by Princeton Hydro and our environmental group, as well as you folks. How will the ERI as a 200-plus page document be used as a overlay to properly evaluate each of these 6 options so we don't put the cart before the horse.
Good question.
That was covered in the ordinance, isn't it? Doesn't the, any proposed?
Yeah, actually,
It would have to go in front of the.
Well, that speaks to the prioritization that we're
Right.
we're eventually gonna do. I mean,
at some point,
they're two separate questions. One is the money and the other is prioritization.
yeah. And actually, the prioritization of the projects, you know, we've collected a big list of the kinds of things that we'd like to see at all the different places, which at some point, you know, we'll share with the public when it's a little bit more cleaned up. It's a pretty extensive list. Some of them are, you know, pie in the sky. Some are very real that we need.
Is that the list that's published on our website?
No, that, I think you're talking about the open space. Oh, no, or the,
About the.
oh, that was just very rough. No, the one that was the field.
We see that list.
It's still a work in progress when it's pretty much done, but, we still have a few more prices. But this, you know, that's what the recreation's job is. That's their department, is to say, this should come first, that should come second. You know, I mean, it's not the ad hoc committee's job, really. I mean, they've pretty much said that at their last meeting. You know, we've collected all this data, but it's, you know, that's the recreation's job. That's what they do, is they know how the fields are used, or the parks are gonna be used, or what their vision is for these properties. And the environmental commission, and so it should
And
go
open
through
space
that,
too,
and
I
open
think.
space and the historic preservation should go through this process in terms of who thinks, you know, which project should come first. It shouldn't be just us saying it. You know, it should have all that process, and I think maybe that hasn't happened in the past, but I think this council is very aware that that's what needs to happen.
Along the same time, you know, the conversation we had about this, the consistent feedback we got is like, it's gonna be more public facing, because it let people, they're surprised, they're caught off guard, that, you know, to try to make it more transparent, you know, if you do it, everything's posted, but, you know, I guess somehow get it out there more and make people feel more welcome to come and do this, exactly this.
Somebody else had a question. Wanda, did you
So,
come up?
Two questions. I'm Wanda Nathick, 7 Tisley Street. So first, once we have whatever, if we get, say, 2 million or whatever it is out of some fund, what do you know what the process is going to be of how, like who's going to get how much of that? Like there's going to be like, oh, this priority about the pool or this priority about the parks. Have you thought about like how that's going to look to then prioritize how it's spent? And then the second question is, have you thought about like if this referendum doesn't go through, like so voters say no, then what?
Then what?
Yeah, because, yeah.
Good question.
Because then what? We still don't have a line item for rec development, so.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to kind of hopefully build some consensus around an idea or a concept.
I think the way we build a consensus, though, is by coming up with an option, maybe not even one of the above, but maybe something that has
compromise of
something for everybody, yeah. And I think that's a little bit of what we talked about in a couple of our past meetings, was trying to strike a balance that makes people feel comfortable that there is a process, there's a way that they can be involved in the future, and that there will be not a winner-take-all in this approach, or any of the approaches.
We don't want winners and
No,
losers.
it's not a zero-sum game in our minds. I mean, we have finite resources, yeah, but, you know, we're trying to make it, you know, everyone will sort of had the priorities addressed in time.
Well, and we want to make sure that there's something for everyone in this referendum, that it's not just for the sports teams, it's not just for, you know, the pool people, it's not just for, you know, the dog park or the hiking, people want to hike. We want to make sure everybody has something that they can appreciate and use.
But to answer the question, what happens if the referendum fails? Things stay just the way they are, and the 80-20% allocation for acquisition
Continues,
versus development stays as it is, and so we would be limited for development to those 20% of funds.
Right, but could we then, at that point, do the bond? So I prefer the bond. I'm here to say, I want the bond. I don't want to do any of this open space
The bond is gonna
moving.
raise everybody's taxes, though, don't they understand that?
We live in New Jersey, and we're all paying taxes.
Pricing
But
people out of
I would
town.
say that if we I prefer the bond, and so when I was referencing, once we have this pot of money, even if the bond is for 2 million or whatever, X million, what is the process then of spending that, that bond?
Well, I think the
money to get
mayor
from a
highlighted
bond?
the high-level process, which is that we would consult with all the different committees to get their input on it. And I think I would recommend that we have further public engagement during the course of that project so that the public can also comment on where their priorities are. We get the advice of the different committees, and then in a public setting, at least 2 meetings, we would then openly debate what's gonna go first, what's gonna go second, what's gonna go third.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other advantage which Jack mentioned about the bond is that every time you ordinance for a bond, the actual thing that you're doing is in there.
Right, you have to be very specific about what you're bonding for.
So every time we do an improvement, we go out to bid, we get a bond, and there's introduction of ordinance, meeting just like this.
Then public hearing.
Meeting just like this, so everyone can come and talk about each project individually as they go forward, and that's.
The other thing about bond ordinance is they require a 2/3 majority to adopt, and then the residents have the opportunity to file a protest after second reading. I believe, don't hold me to this, I believe it's 15% of the voters at the last general election at which the assembly was elected.
We did that. I couldn't hear you, Jack.
Yeah.
15% of what?
It's 15% of the voters who voted at the last general election at which the assembly was elected.
The council.
No, assembly, state assembly.
State assembly.
Because it's not a real life year, but it's not a presidential year, so it's a compromise.
Yeah.
That may not be exactly right, but it's close.
How is 15%? Is there a vote set to a vote? How is it the 15%?
People circulate petitions. They've done it before.
We did.
So 15% of people can stop it.
That's the number of signatures you have to get. If we pass something we didn't like, we would have to get signatures of a number of citizens equal to 15% of the Bernardsville voters who voted in the general assembly.
In the last election, yeah. Right.
Assembly election. Two examples in New Jersey where you can have a binding referendum. One is the bond ordinance protest, and the other is the public question on using open space trust funds. The only other option in New Jersey, unlike California and places like that, is you can have non-binding referenda, but the governing body doesn't have to honor the results.
But I do think it's important to remember bonds fail. I mean, bond requests fail. People vote them down, and so it's not a done deal. When you say, "Well, I prefer bonding," that has its risks as well.
Well, no, they don't vote on the bond, we can just do that.
But then
they can vote it down.
But then they can do the petition and do that.
It would take about 5% of the population, based on voting turnout to stop it.
Right.
It's been done in the past.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't, does it stop it, Jack, or it takes it to referendum?
It takes it to a referendum.
Yeah, so it doesn't stop it, it would just require that item has to go to public referendum before it could be implemented.
Right.
So it wouldn't be as quick if that happened.
No, that would slow it down, yeah.
How quick, but.
And it would also, again, if we're gonna bond for something, we would still have to go through that prioritization process,
Yeah, well,
because you
that-
don't
that's
want
the
it just
plan.
randomly, so you're still
That's the plan.
still laying out the plan. So
I think that's an important point, because in all of these options, including the option that was just discussed, this bonding idea, we need to have a prioritization process. It needs to include the committees that you already highlighted.
Right.
So that's kind of universal across all of these cases, including not having a referendum. There's still, I think, we need to have this prioritization process and the public engagement. So I think that's universally applicable to all options.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is that in speaking to residents and folks, some of them that are here tonight, a lot of information was shared to me from other towns, and one of the things that was very exceptional in a town larger than ours, but not too far away, is Randolph, and they had a recreation plan put together. So while we do have an open space plan,
It is an open space and recreation plan.
Randolph put together.
It just says up and recreation to make planning board happy.
Yeah, I think if you take a look, or if we maybe as a council take a look and discuss at our next meeting, the Randolph recreation plan, or explore the cost of what it would take to have a professional planner look at our recreation needs, because I know that we can spend open space money to come up with plans, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Absolutely. So,
That would be out of the 20%.
That's already there.
would it? Cause it's
Yes,
not.
that's-
Yes.
Well, at least,
Now, if it were to acquire a piece, if you wanted to get a planner's opinion as to whether a piece of property should be purchased, then I think that could get out of acquisition. So,
Right.
depending on the-
But we already have the properties.
I think that would have to be development.
Yeah.
$81,000 currently right now.
right, so in other words, you know, it would, and again, I encourage anyone who wants, I can share it with you, the Randolph and other towns have done this, where they put together a recreation plan that addresses all the needs of all the teams, all the schools, it's,
Well, that's what our recreation committee should be doing, yes?
well, it would,
Yeah.
right, but in this case, you would get a planner to do it. Planning, similar to the downtown redevelopment thing, you know, a professional that does.
That's good people to do it for you, pretty expensive.
Problem is you don't have money to do it, if the 20% diluted every time we acquire new land, so the rec committee only has X amount of dollars to come up with ideas or to use, so every time we're acquiring land, we're diluting that 20%.
Assuming we do it.
Yeah, but even, you know, without, I think what we need the recreation committee to look at is the prioritization, and maybe they do need somebody to help them with that. Because they probably know best out of all the committees, you know, it probably should, and the way this is written is they're kind of one of the first ones to start looking at that, so I think they're the group that should be working on that.
And it should be like a 10-year visualization, you know.
Yeah, it should be, a visionary plan of what we'd like to see, and that way we'll have some priorities and go from there. Just for tonight's meeting, and I know this is, and thank you so much for all this, I think, you know, it's very different than what I thought it was gonna come out like. And I think that was the goal, is to kind of make people think a little bit differently about what was proposed. And what I'd like you to do is take a little green sticky and come up here and just stick on which one you think at this point, after you've heard everybody, yes.
Could I just add one comment?
Yeah.
Paul said by 5 Charlotte Hill, there was just one question or statement that's been made about the bond, and it's gonna raise our taxes. I'm okay with that. We live in New Jersey. Because guess what? Our real estate values in this town are declining year over year over year, all right? The value decline in our homes, right, far outweighs any distributed tax increase of a bond, right? I will happily pay and support an incremental tax for that if you could turn around my thinking real estate values. It is far outpacing the drain of the value of our homes. It is in our master plan that we have a responsibility as a borough to protect the financial values of our town's homes. I'm gonna be blunt, we failed at that as a town, we all have. So I think it's time that we have to take a stand here and invest in this town and get us on the right track so we can restore us back to being a desirable town. Because when you think of your town is a product, the product you're trying to sell. We have a product that no one's buying right now. We are in desperate need for parks. We don't have one. We do not have a Harry Dunham Park. There isn't a single place where a kid can learn how to ride a bicycle. All right? And that's the test for any type of a park. If a child can ride a bicycle with training wheels on it safely, that's a park. We don't have one of those. And I think when people are coming in and as families are moving into a town, they're looking for these types of amenities. They're taking a look at the schools, they're taking a look at the town, they're taking a look at your center of your town. We've got great people and intelligent people here and active people trying to make things better. I fully support us taking the action here to take quick action. The bond seems to be the fastest path to get it done. And if there's an incremental hit on taxes, so be it. Because we need to start stabilizing our price values and getting the value up, which will clearly offset any tax increase. Just one man's opinion.
So here's what I want you to do, because I'll be curious to see, now that we've done all this, let's kind of get out of the way here.
Yeah.
We'll come out of the way and just, we won't voting here. But take some green stickies, kind of, mob around here. Yeah, I can do that. So we got some green, and just stick it on the option that you think, after listening, you will have your support. Yes, go ahead. Just introduce.
Hi, Mayor and Council, and these great people from the public. We had a really good conversation here tonight. I'm Christy McDonald. I'm the Chair of the Environmental Commission, and we prepared, members of our commission worked together to prepare a letter for today, but the format of the meeting is not really appropriate for us to go reading a long letter. So I'm just going to make a statement and then submit the letter to the council. The Environmental Commission strongly urges the council to pursue option 5, no referendum to change the ordinance, but instead use bonding for improvements. So that's the official support of the members of the Environmental Commission. Thank you.
Thanks. And anybody else have a comment, question? Something, did everybody get a green sticky and do it? Because it looks like bonding won over here, so that, I was surprised, yes.
My question is a really small question, and it just has to do with the survey online.
We had too many options, I think we really, no.
And I just wanted to make sure that there's some ability to make sure that people are not going online that don't live in Bernardsville and kind of chiming in on something that's kind of our deal, so.
Don't have to give their name and address.
Okay, so that's good, and somebody, that's good.
The addresses so far are all Bernardsville.
Okay.
Yeah, and
So-
and it's monitoring that they can only vote once.
And it is
Yeah.
it is up and online now?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
So
good.
people that are watching the meeting, and if you want, I would suggest you have people watch the meeting, because I think this was valuable information.
Definitely.
Before they vote, so they know what the conversation was and some of the background that we gave and the questions. It's just, it's a good way to hear the pros and cons and what people think. And
Okay, all right, thank you.
okay. Yes.
A quick statement about the bonding.
Okay. Come on up.
Brian Glenn, 10 Laurel Lane. I guess we talked about this very briefly before, but I just wanted to stress the importance because I know a lot of folks were worried about taxes going up. I don't want taxes going up for sure, but when we borrow money at 2 or 2.5%, when you as a household save money, you're going to your stockbroker and you're asking for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, and it may be less one year, it may be more, but your own cost of capital is a lot more than that. So the point is, you would rather earn your money at 4 or 5 or 6% and then take some of that, you'll still score a profit. Take some of that and pay the higher taxes down the road. You may have a higher home value as a result, but that was my point when we were talking about cost of capital at the household level versus 2 or 2.5% at the municipality level. Thank you.
Thanks. Heather?
Hi, Heather Ike, 60 Stone Fence Road. I just have a question. I'd like to hear from each one of you on how many of you are prepared to vote for bonding for active or passive recreation. Since that looks like it's the winner, I want to hear if you guys are going to
Well, I think
move forward
because
with
we've
that.
got this survey up, how long do we want to leave it up? For a week or two? Or maybe just till our next meeting? No, I mean, just to get that feed. No, we're not gonna base our decision on that.
Yeah, I just want to know where you stand on bonding in general for active and passive recreation. Since I've been here in 2012, I don't think we've done that much in those areas.
Have we done any bonding for?
Or spending in general.
We had a bond anticipation note, as Tom knows, for 1.6 million, I think, there was over $700,000 of that was for recreation purposes.
When was this?
$300,000 for the playground.
Oh, for the
alone.
playground.
That's a short-term note, right? Is that real long-term borrowing?
No, at the moment, it's an anticipated note.
That's less than what, a year?
1 year, but we can roll it over for 9 consecutive years. And then on the 10th year, it has to go to permanent financing, or any time before the 10th year.
Right, I think we're talking about, like a 10-year bond, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
A 10-year bond for roads.
The last bond that we did was in 2015, and then that was for a $14 million bond, which loaded up a lot of bond anticipation notes from previous years that had not reached the 10-year limit. Right. And I can't off the top of my head tell you how much of that was for recreation, but it was, it was more than, say, $500,000. It was a pretty significant amount, but it encompassed a lot of things for a lot of years.
That was the road too, right? Isn't that
Oh, there was,
road
the
engineering?
road, well, but yeah, the roads were, that was a bond anticipation, it was included in that $14 million. It lumped everything we had, and for 3 years, that was the only debt service that we had, just that bond that goes out to the year, it was a 17-year bond. And I think it was 2024 or something in that, when it came due, or when it finished. But since then, we went 3 years without doing any other borrowing. But in 2018, we went out for 1.6 million. And as I say, that's in the band. We've rolled it over once this past April. And the next bond that we do, whenever it is, that and any other short-term bond would be lumped into that.
And what's the total outstanding? Do we know?
Total outstanding from the bond?
For the whole municipality.
Our total debt.
Oh, well, it was, at the time, we rolled it up, it was $14 million, and we've paid down, I think it's about 800,000 a year, I'm not sure, Tom.
My recollection is it's around approximately 12 million right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we still have our AAA rating, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
And it's 12, and what we've been doing is like 1% of the tax.
Well, 1% of we've raised the amount to be raised by taxation over the last 6 or 7 years by 3%. And 1% of that is for the 10-year road referendum, the $10 billion road referendum that was passed, I don't know exactly what year, about 4 or 5 years ago. You should all know that there are exemptions to the 2% cap that we've been under for all of these years. And there's a lot of exemptions. Debt service is an exemption, and the health benefits, pension. And the councils have not taken some of those exemptions in an effort to keep taxes at a 3% amount to be raised by taxation. So, for example, if you take a couple of those exemptions, and I don't know the dollar amounts right off the top of my head, but in order to operate the business, we need at least we've been operating at 2%, the business of the borough, with the maintenance and all the trucks and that the mayor has alluded to. But if we took some of those exemptions and put the 1% for the $10 million borrowing, that 3% could go to 4%, 5%, very easily, very quickly, just so you know. But, we have, Far Hills is the lowest tax rate in Somerset County. Peapack Gladstone's right below it. We are right underneath them. The difference between us and Far Hills is very, very minimal. So our tax rates have been substantially some of the best in Somerset County, but that was by design from the past councils of the last 6 or 7 years. And that's what was done. This finance committee, the mayor and Tom O'Day and John Donahue, we had about 10 meetings before we came to the budget, and we followed the same practice as prior councils, and the amount to be raised for taxation is at 3%, 2 for operating the budget, and 1% for the $10 million project. But it sounds like maybe there'll be a change in that.
Thank you, Ralph. You want to say something?
Hi, Mike Long, 22 Crest Drive. It's a good segue, actually, to remember what we're talking about. We're talking about bonding. We're talking about there's potentially going to sound like there's going to be a tax increase. And it sounded like 15% of voters in the last assembly election can sign a petition to strike it down. So I think we all just need to be open-eyed about what we're talking about. That's 50% of voters, that's not 50% of residents. So I haven't done the numbers, but I'm sure the numbers are probably in the hundreds.
We just did it at the referendum.
Perfect. So the petitioners who would not want the bonding to take place, they don't have exactly the highest hurdle to get over. And then at that point, it becomes a referendum, which we would then all need to support. And whomever who supports it would need to encourage others to support it. So I just want everybody in this room to understand, and everybody on this council to understand, that just because we think bonding is a good idea it is a very difficult thing to accomplish. And we have to, if you support it, you have to sell it. You have to tell people. We've started talking in the youth sports world, we have to show up. Everybody who believes in this needs to show up, whatever that may be. Showing up at these meetings, showing up at community events, talking about it, putting up signs. However it is, you need to fight for it. Each one of you, if you support it, needs to figure that out. And I say that to the council as well, sincerely. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I think, let's not have narrow vision. I mean, we had 37, if I counted really fast, we had 37 votes here. There was over 7,000 residents and 2,500 households. We haven't heard about what's been voting online, so I wouldn't take this vote as the consensus of the community just yet.
I didn't mean to vote against it, I was just making sure that
Yeah,
everybody.
no, I understand your point, but I've heard several times people refer to the fact, well, everybody wants to have bonding because they had 20
Well, also,
dots
there's a number
there.
of kids that voted for the bond too, so.
Right?
There was, like, all the kids in the room voted for the bond, so you gotta take them off. And if you combine one and two, well, that's true, the other ones are gonna pay for it.
Again, I think we have to.
This is not a binding election.
That's right, but we had a request for a straw poll earlier, and this is why we shouldn't do that, because I think we have to digest what's been said here, but also digest the information that's coming in online that we have not yet seen.
And again, and this, Jake's furiously writing back there, so I'm sure there'll be an article in the Bernardsville News, and we'll probably get more feedback after people read about it. I'm sure we'll get lots of phone calls. So it's an active process, you know, we're not ready, I think, as Heather asked, to make a decision right now, because we're still collecting information, and this was an opportunity for people to be heard, and that's what we want. We want you to be heard.
So to your point about, you know, there may be an article in the newspaper, and how long should we have the survey open? We should have it open for a few days past whenever
The paper comes
The
out.
paper
I would
might-
say like maybe 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks.
2
is
weeks,
good.
does that sound good to the council?
Maybe up to when's our next, the second
That's
meeting?
less than 2 weeks.
June 24th.
So maybe up to that meeting?
Maybe close it a couple days
So that
before
we
so we
have
can
the
have the
data.
data.
Yeah.
So a couple days prior,
How about we close the Thursday before so that
Yeah.
we could get that in our packet?
does everybody agree to that?
Yeah, you're inching your way up.
Hi, Jamie Hartnett, Anderson Hill Road. I just want to make a comment about something a previous speaker said about attacking the open space fund. I just don't think we should characterize it that way. I mean, this was something that was voted on years ago. Christine clearly showed that all these other towns use 100%, most of them 100% for both open space as well as improvements and development. So I just think we should be careful about characterizing this as attacking a fund that was voted on. Let the voters vote on it again. Give us a chance to vote on it again.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Chad?
Hi, Chad McQueen, 15 Sycamore Hill. I'm sorry for missing the first competing meeting. I think it's important for us to remember the reason why we are in this position, where we have a town where people are willing to raise taxes to do a lot of things because we need a lot of quick fixes. It's been a revenue problem that's been happening over years and years and years. It's not an attack on the open space fund. It's taking monies that are collected for open space purposes and using them differently. Sometimes you can use them to acquire properties where we need to. Sometimes you can use them to improve properties where we need to. Priorities change over time. Priorities 10, 12, 15 years ago are not the same priorities this town has today. Referendum in option 1 allows the council to prioritize dollars and the tax dollars in a way that the elected officials sitting on this council at that moment. So the folks who got voted in last year and the year before, or next year or the year before that, can prioritize based on what their voters are saying they need to do. And really that's what this referendum does. It gives the voters, again, it gives the councils flexibility to spend the taxpayers' money the way the taxpayers are saying.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one question to Jack?
Yeah.
The money that's already in acquisition only cannot be moved
In my
anywhere
opinion,
else.
that cannot be done unless the public approves it.
So could that be a referendum too?
Sure, that's what some of these are.
Well, that's what, yeah, like,
So
that's
some of the
what
options-
option is transferring 2 million of it.
So if,
Or
just
1
as an
million.
example, we could say 100% either or for the entire balance that's there now. Just an example.
No.
Just
No.
new revenue.
Just new revenue.
Just the revenue that's allocated that year.
So sorry, I think though to Chris,
I'm just
to answer
trying
Christine's
to-
question, option one is what the audience is talking about right now, that the new revenue would go in as 100% flexible.
Right.
But you're asking a different question, Christine, which is, could we make the existing funds 100% flexible? Is that the question?
Yeah, I don't think you can do that.
Well, let's let Jack answer.
The statute's not on the question. So I can't imagine the court overturning it if it was approved by the public. The public's money is being held in escrow for the residents. So in my opinion, you could do that if it's approved by the public question.
That would be a tough sell, I think.
Yeah, and I just have,
I just wanted to add
I just have a statement. Look, I'm a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. I believe in the rule of law and what the voters say. I believe wholeheartedly the voters said 15 years ago that those funds should be used for that purpose. So I would not advocate touching funds that were utilized and voted on for a different purpose. What I'm saying is let the voters vote now on what new funds can be utilized going forward in a way that allows additional flexibility, because we don't want to bring a referendum to this council or to this town every year, every 5 years, every 10 years. Let the council choose on an annual basis how those funds get directed.
Right, so the 450, which we collect annually right now, based
Right,
on,
would be 100% either or.
right, but if, as we spend acquisition money, that 450 goes down, right?
Sorry,
It's the
I was
20
thinking about something
The
else.
6 million would stay there.
Okay,
It's all the new money coming in each year that you would be spending, not the 6 million that's there, unless you wanted to buy something. Then you could use that 6 million to buy a property.
Unless you voted to do it.
right, so if we do a referendum that were to say that, option one, you would have 450,000 each year that you could use for either acquisition or development.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Or some mix of the two.
Or, right,
Right.
yeah,
Both.
it
Either or.
could be either or.
100% flexible.
Again?
And I know this money has been accumulated for purposes. I know that the property next to this one has been one that's had its eye on by the borough for some time. That doesn't mean if that property ever came for sale, we're not gonna shell out $20 million. We have the ability to bond and to borrow money for that anyway. So there are ways to solve those problems.
Well, yeah, and there may be, some of the projects may be too big, you know, that you may have to bond anyway for some things. Like if we wanted to completely redo the pool, you know, that may be worth bonding, because you'll never, you know, with 450, it would be a hard sell, but
Right.
anyway. One more, okay?
I just wanted to state that with option one, everybody's project is going to want to be the project that's going to be done with the first $450,000. And not everybody's project is going to be that project. And so there's going to be pretty much out and out war in the council room about that money
Not
each
us.
year. No, not among you. I mean among us, with competing factions. Whereas even with option three, which I wouldn't advocate for because of the concern about the money having been already put into the fund for acquisition specifically, but more to option five, which I voted for, you have more money up front. You can work with more things. Fewer people have to wait until year 4, year 5, and then you get into your sunset, you know, positives and negatives. So that's something to be said about this, the trickle of funds, essentially, since it cost us $300,000 to do a playground. $450,000 a year is a trickle when it comes to the things that some people in the room want. So, you know, that's a worry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I just say, just a quick question really quick? Is there an option, I'm still at Washington Corner Road, I haven't moved, to use the bond issuance to address the short-term issue? Because I agree with you, because it's just, 450,000 solves nothing. I mean, I think we look at Veterans Field and that's wiped out one
Right.
year. And then there's maintenance, deterioration. I mean, there's not a lot of projections here with any specificity that gives me confidence, whether it's on a financial projection basis or a deterioration basis. could you issue a bond and pay off that bond with the 20% use year on year, so that you don't actually call it a tax? Because you're not taxing them, ultimately, you're using existing funds to pay off the issuance of the debt. You're not levying a tax.
Jack?
It's just, you're extending the
Is that
ability
yes?
to pay off on a cash flow basis.
If you use the bond,
All right, that's,
Yeah.
I just thought I might be missing something.
No, no, I think you're right, yeah. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, I don't know if anybody else has something they have to say, but I think, this was very productive. I thank you so much for going along with my little thing here. I think it was a useful exercise, and I really appreciate you being here. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Second. We are adjourned. Thank you again. Thank you for your great idea.